Hell's Angel heard a girl screaming from inside a trapped furniture. He saved her. But who did this? The morning sun barely peeked over the clubhouse fence when Bear rolled the dresser toward his trailer, his boots crunching on the gravel lot. The old thing was heavy, made of real oak, with brass handles that had gone green with age. Someone had donated it the night before, left it propped against the garage door with a sticky note that just said for the flea market thing. There he goes again, Tiny called out from across the lot. Tiny was anything but small, 6'5" and built like a refrigerator. But nobody in the club questioned the nickname anymore. He leaned against his bike, arms crossed, grinning, our very own furniture guy. Bear grunted and kept pushing. Somebody's gotta do it. Yeah, but you volunteer for it. Every single time. Tiny walked over, grabbed the other end of the dresser without being asked, and helped Bear guide it up the ramp onto the trailer. Last month it was a whole living room set. The month before that, a piano nobody could even play. Piano sold for $200. Went to a family who needed a fridge more than they needed piano lessons. But hey, money's money. Bear wiped sweat from his forehead, even though the morning air still had a chill to it. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story Rooster. The club's sergeant-at-arms sauntered out of the garage with a cup of coffee in his hand, steam curling up into the cool air. He had a scar above his eyebrow from a bar fight nobody talked about anymore, and a laugh that carried across parking lots. You know what they call a Hell's Angel who spends his Saturday hauling old dressers to a flea market for charity? What's that? Bear asked, not looking up from the straps he was tightening across the dresser. A soft touch. Rooster laughed at his own joke, slapping his knee like it was the funniest thing he'd said all week. Keep laughing, Bear said. See if I bring back donuts next time. That shut Rooster up quick. The whole chapter knew Bear's donut runs were legendary. Cinnamon twists from the bakery 3 towns over that nobody else bothered driving to. Rooster held up both hands in surrender. All right, no need to threaten a man's breakfast. Tiny checked the straps on the other side of the trailer, giving them a good tug to make sure they'd hold. Seriously though, Bear, this is like the 5th week in a row. You're gonna run out of room in that storage unit. Storage units for tools. This stuff doesn't sit around long. Bear climbed onto his bike, a big Harley with worn leather saddlebags and a paint job that had seen better decades. People give it to us. We get it to people who need it. Simple as that. Simple as that, Rooster repeated, shaking his head with a smile. You know, for a guy who looks like he could snap a man in half, you sure do have a soft spot for lost causes. Bear didn't answer that one. He just pulled his sunglasses down over his eyes and revved the engine, the sound rattling off the garage walls. Some things didn't need explaining. He'd grown up in a house that never felt like a home, bounced from foster family to foster family until none of the faces stuck anymore. Nobody had ever loaded a dresser onto a trailer for him. Maybe that was why he did it now. Maybe it wasn't anything that deep. Either way, it didn't matter. The work needed doing, and he was the one who showed up to do it. The ride to the flea market drop-off point took the better part of the afternoon, winding through back roads and past strip malls that had seen better days. By the time Bear pulled his bike into the lot behind the abandoned warehouse, the sun was hanging low, throwing long orange shadows across the cracked asphalt. The building itself looked like it hadn't been used in years. Windows boarded, paint peeling in long curls off the brick. He killed the engine and swung his leg over the bike, boots hitting the ground with a solid thud. The lot was quiet, just the distant hum of traffic from the main road and the creak of the trailer as he unhooked the straps. Other donated furniture sat scattered nearby, waiting for the flea market crew to sort through it. Bear grabbed the dresser by its brass handles and started hauling it toward the growing pile, the weight settling familiar and solid in his arms. The lot behind the flea market smelled like diesel oil and old rain. Bear backed his trailer up next to a row of sagging couches and busted bookshelves, the gravel crunching under his boots as he hopped down. The sun was low now, painting everything orange and gold, the kind of light that made even junk look like it belonged in a painting. A heavy-set man in a faded Grateful Dead shirt came shuffling over, clipboard in hand. This was Pete, the flea market organizer, a guy Bear had dealt with a dozen times before. Pete always looked like he was one bad day away from a heart attack, sweat beading on his forehead even though the evening had turned cool. "Bear, my man." Pete waved the clipboard like a fan. "You're cutting it close today. We're closing up in 20 minutes. "Got held up," Bear said, hauling the dresser off the trailer with a grunt. The wood was heavy, dark oak, water stained on one corner. Somebody's grandmother's furniture, probably. Bear always wondered about that, where this stuff came from, what kind of lives it used to sit inside of. This the last of it? For today, yeah, Pete scribbled something on his clipboard without really looking at it. "You're a good man, doing this every week. Half these guys just dump stuff at the curb and call it a donation. You actually bring it here." Bear shrugged, hefting the dresser toward the stack of armoires and cabinets already piled up near the fence. "Ain't nothing. Beats sitting around the clubhouse arguing about football." Pete laughed, a wheezy sound. "I hear that." He glanced at his watch. "You need help stacking that?" "Nah, I got it." Bear set the dresser down against a tall armoire, one of 3 or 4 crammed together near the back of the lot. The pile had grown tall over the weeks, donated wardrobes and hutches and old wooden chests, all waiting for buyers who probably wouldn't come until the weekend market opened again. "Well, lock the gate behind you when you're done." "I got a dinner thing." Pete was already walking backward, clipboard tucked under his arm. "Tell the boys I said hello." "And thanks again, Bear. Seriously." Yeah, Bear waved him off, already turning back to the stack. Pete's footsteps crunched away across the gravel, and then Bear heard the far-off jingle of keys. A car door, an engine starting. The lot went quiet except for the wind picking through loose newspaper and the distant hum of traffic from the main road. Bear wiped his forehead with the back of his glove and looked at the dresser he'd just set down. It needed to go up on top of the others, next to a big double-door armoire that looked older than everything else in the pile. Dark wood with brass hinges gone green with age. He bent his knees, got a good grip on the dresser, and started to lift. That was when he heard it. A sound so faint he almost mistook it for the wind. A thin, cracked cry, muffled like it was coming from underwater, from somewhere deep inside the stack of furniture. Bear froze, the dresser still half raised in his arms. He held perfectly still, straining his ears against the quiet of the empty lot. For a second there was nothing but the wind and the far-off traffic. Then it came again. Softer this time, but unmistakable. A voice, a child's voice, muffled and desperate, coming from somewhere inside that pile of old wardrobes and cabinets. His arms went rigid. Every hair on the back of his neck stood up straight. Bear turned his head slowly, scanning the stack of furniture, trying to pinpoint where the sound had come from. His heart had started pounding hard against his ribs, a drumbeat of alarm that spread through his whole body. "Pete!" he shouted, but the organizer was already gone, his taillights disappearing around the corner of the building. Nobody else was in the lot. Nobody else had heard. Bear set the dresser down carefully, his eyes locked on the tall dark armoire near the top of the pile, the one with the brass hinges gone green with age. Bear stood still for a moment, letting the evening sounds settle around him. A truck engine turned over somewhere in the parking lot. Gravel crunched under someone's boots, growing fainter. Then, nothing but the wind moving through the gaps in the stacked furniture. He waited. There it was again. Faint, muffled, a sound that could have been a cat caught somewhere, if you wanted to believe that. Bear didn't believe it. "Hello?" he called out, his deep voice cutting through the quiet lot. "Anybody in there?" No answer came back, but the sound shifted, a scrape of something small against wood. Bear moved toward the stacks. The light was fading fast now, the sun dropping behind the warehouse roof and turning everything the color of rust. Shadows pooled between the dressers and cabinets and old kitchen tables somebody's grandmother probably once ate dinner at. He walked slow, careful, running his hand along the edges of furniture, listening hard. "I'm not gonna hurt you," he said, keeping his voice low and steady, the way he might talk to a spooked horse or a stray dog that had been kicked one too many times. "Just tell me where you are." A muffled whimper answered him. It came from his left, somewhere near a stack of armoires pushed up against the chain-link fence. Bear's heart kicked up hard against his ribs. He'd heard sounds like that before, a long time ago, back when he was a scared kid himself hiding in closets and under porches, waiting for the yelling to stop. He picked up his pace, weaving between the furniture, pushing aside a broken chair that blocked his path. The stack of armoires loomed ahead of him, 3 of them shoved together, old and heavy, the kind of furniture built to last generations. "Hey," Bear called again. "Say something. Let me know you're there." This time the whimper turned into something closer to a sob. Small and broken, coming from the middle armoire. Bear's eyes locked onto it. Something was wrong with the door. He crouched down and saw it clear as day. Gray duct tape wound around the handles in thick, ugly loops, sealing the doors shut from the outside. His stomach dropped. "Okay," he said, mostly to himself now, his hands already working at the tape. "Okay, I got you. Hang on." The tape was old and stubborn, sticking to itself in tangled knots. Bear tore at it with his thick fingers, ripping strip after strip away, his knuckles scraping against the rough wood. Somewhere close, muffled sobbing turned into gasping, quick and shallow, like whoever was inside was running out of air. "I'm right here," Bear said, louder now. "Urgent. I'm getting you out. Just hold on a few more seconds." He got the last of the tape free and grabbed the door handles, planting his boots and yanking hard. The old wood groaned in protest, the hinges stiff from disuse, but Bear had spent 30 years hauling engines and busted transmissions. He pulled again, harder, and the door gave way with a crack that echoed through the empty lot. Inside, curled into a ball too small for the space around her, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 9 years old, her knees pulled up tight against her chest, her arms wrapped around herself like she was trying to disappear. Her face was pale and streaked with dried tears, her lips cracked, her eyes wide and glassy with fear. Clutched in one small fist was a folded piece of paper, crumpled and damp from being held so tight for so long. She gasped when the light hit her, sucking in air like she'd forgotten how to breathe properly, her whole body trembling. "Hey, hey," Bear said, his voice dropping soft, gentle, nothing like the growl he used with grown men who crossed him. He crouched down to her level, careful not to make any sudden moves. "It's okay. You're okay now." The girl flinched back against the wood, her eyes darting toward him, toward the open sky above, toward everything all at once, like she didn't know which direction danger was coming from. "My name's Bear," he said quietly. "Nobody's gonna hurt you. I promise you that." Slowly, carefully, he reached his arms into the armoire and gathered her up, feeling how light she was, how her small body shook against his massive frame. She didn't fight him. She just clung to that folded note like it was the only solid thing left in her world, and let him pull her out into the open air. The light was almost gone now, the sky turning the color of a fresh bruise, purple and gray over the warehouse roof. Bear knelt down slow, the way he might approach a hurt dog, no sudden moves, no loud sounds. His knees popped against the gravel. He didn't care. "Hey," he said. "Hey, it's okay. You're okay now." Della didn't look okay. Her small body shook so hard her teeth clicked together. Her eyes were huge and wet, locked on his face like she was trying to decide if he was a monster or not. Bear understood that look. He'd worn it himself, a long time ago, in houses that were never his, waiting to find out what kind of grown-up had come through the door this time. He unzipped his leather jacket slow and held it out, not forcing it on her, just offering. "This is gonna smell like motor oil," he said. "Sorry about that. But it's warm." She didn't move for a second. Then, like something in her finally cracked open just a little, she leaned forward and let him drape it over her shoulders. It swallowed her whole, hung past her knees, but she pulled it tight around herself with both fists like it was the only solid thing in the world. "There you go," Bear said softly. "That's it." Her breath still came in short little hitches. She was clutching that folded piece of paper so hard her knuckles had gone white. Bear didn't ask about it. Not yet. There'd be time for questions. Right now she just needed to breathe. "My truck's not far," he said. "Just past those crates. You think you can walk? Or you want me to carry you?" Della's eyes flicked toward the dark stretch of warehouse lot, then back to him. She didn't answer with words, but she lifted her arms up, just slightly, like a much younger kid would do. Bear's chest tightened. He scooped her up gentle as he could, like she weighed nothing at all, which she nearly did, and started walking. She was stiff in his arms the whole way, watching every shadow they passed. Bear kept his voice low and steady, talking about nothing much. The crates, the diner up the road, anything to fill the silence and let her hear that his voice wasn't going to turn mean or sharp. By the time he set her down in the passenger seat of his truck, she'd stopped shaking quite so bad. The diner was a squat little place 10 minutes down the road, one of those spots with a buzzing sign and red vinyl booths patched with tape. Bear picked a booth in the back corner, away from the window, away from the door. He figured she'd want it that way. He was right. Della slid in against the wall, small as anything, still wrapped in his jacket, and stared at the table like it might do something unexpected. "Get whatever you want," Bear said when the waitress came by. "Pancakes, burger, don't matter." Della didn't answer, but when the food came, grilled cheese and a chocolate milkshake, she looked at it for a long moment before picking up a fry. Then, another. Bear didn't push. He just sat there, quiet, letting her set the pace, sipping his coffee like there was nowhere else in the world he needed to be. After a while, after maybe 5 or 6 bites of the sandwich, her voice came out. So soft he almost missed it. "He locked me in there." Bear went very still. "Who did, sweetheart?" "My stepdad." Her fingers picked at the edge of the napkin. "Russ," he said. "He said I needed to learn a lesson." Then he drove away. Her chin trembled. "He said nobody was going to find me." Bear felt something cold settle low in his gut, a feeling he hadn't had in a long time. He kept his face calm, though, kept his voice even, because she needed that from him more than she needed to see what was building behind his eyes. "You're not going to have to worry about him no more," Bear said. "I promise you that." He reached into his jacket pocket, the one she wasn't wearing, and pulled out his phone. His thumb hovered over the numbers. "I gotta call some folks who can help," he told her. "Police, that okay with you?" Della looked at him a long moment, then gave the smallest nod he'd ever seen. Bear dialed. Officer Reyes came through the diner door with the kind of walk that told you he'd done this before. Not rushed. Not slow either. Careful, like a man who knew that big movements scared small things. He was younger than Bear expected, maybe 35, with dark hair cut close and a face that hadn't gone hard yet despite the badge on his chest. He stopped a few feet from the booth and crouched down so he was eye level with Della instead of towering over her. "Hey there," he said. "My name's Officer Reyes. That's a lot of name, huh? You can just call me Reyes if you want." Della didn't answer. She had both hands wrapped around the water glass Bear had ordered her, and she watched Reyes the way a rabbit watches a dog that hasn't noticed it yet. "This is Bear," Reyes said, nodding toward him. "He's the one who called us. He tells me you had a rough day. Still nothing." Bear shifted in his seat, close enough that his shoulder almost touched hers, and he kept his voice low. "It's okay, Della. He's here to help. Just like I told you." It took a long moment. The diner hummed around them, plates clinking, a radio playing something soft near the kitchen. Finally, Della's mouth moved, and the same whisper came out that she'd given Bear before. "My stepfather. He locked me in there. He said it was because I was bad." Reyes didn't flinch, but Bear saw something tighten in his jaw. He pulled a small notepad from his pocket, though he barely glanced at it as he wrote. "Can you tell me his name, sweetheart?" "Russ. Russ Colton." "And do you know your address?" "Where you live with him?" Della gave it in a small, flat voice, the kind of voice a kid uses when they've had to memorize something out of fear rather than comfort. Reyes wrote it down, then stood and stepped a few feet away, radio in hand. Bear caught pieces of it. A dispatcher's voice crackled back, tinny and distant. Reyes gave the name, the address, asked for a check on the child's records. The stepfather's record. Anything in the system. Bear didn't move from the booth. He wasn't about to leave her side, not for a second, not even when Reyes glanced back at him like he might want privacy for the call. Della's hand had found the edge of his jacket sleeve, the leather still hanging off her small shoulders, and she gripped it like it was the only solid thing left in the world. "You're doing good," Bear murmured to her. "You're doing real good." She didn't say anything back, just held on tighter. Minutes passed. The radio crackled again, low and steady, words tumbling back and forth that Bear couldn't quite make out from where he sat. He watched Rias's face instead, watched it change. First it was just professional, blank and waiting. Then it creased, just slightly, like a man hearing something that didn't add up. Reyes said something else into the radio, waited, listened again. Then he clicked it off and walked back toward the booth, slower this time. His eyes went to Bear first, not Della, and that told Bear something was wrong before a word came out of his mouth. "Can I talk to you for a second?" Reyes said quietly, tilting his head toward the counter, out of Della's earshot. Bear didn't want to move. He looked at Della, who was staring down at her water glass again, small and hollowed out, and he hated the idea of stepping even a few feet away from her. But he could see in Reyes's face that this mattered, so he squeezed her shoulder gently and told her he'd be right there, right at the counter, not going anywhere. He stood, and the two men walked a few steps away. Reyes rubbed the back of his neck, looking down at his notepad like the words on it might rearrange themselves into something that made sense. "There's nothing," Reyes said finally. "No school enrollment under her name. No medical records anywhere in the county, or the next one over. And the address you gave me, the one for Colton? There's no family listed there at all. Not her. Not him. Not really. It's like she doesn't exist on paper." Bear turned back to look at Della, sitting alone in the booth, small and silent, and felt something cold settle into his chest. The police station smelled like old coffee and copier ink. Fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, too white, making everything look tired. Bear sat on a hard plastic chair that creaked every time he shifted his weight, which was a lot, because a man his size wasn't built for chairs like that. He didn't care. He wasn't going anywhere. Across from him, on a wooden bench pushed against the wall, Della slept. Someone had found her a blanket, scratchy gray wool, and wrapped it around her small shoulders. Her chest rose and fell in slow, even breaths. It was the first time all day she looked like a kid instead of someone bracing for a blow. Bear watched her the way you'd watch a candle in the wind. Like if he looked away too long, she might go out. Her hand was curled up near her chin, and even in sleep her fingers gripped something tight. A piece of paper, folded so many times it had gone soft at the creases, gray with dirt and sweat. She'd been holding on to it since Bear pulled her out of that armoire. She hadn't let it go once. Not when Reyes asked his questions, not when the diner waitress brought her a grilled cheese, not even when her eyes finally closed. Reyes walked over, 2 cups of coffee in his hands, and passed one to Bear without a word. He sat down heavy, rubbing his eyes. "She's out cold," Reyes said quietly. "Poor kid. Body probably shut down the second she felt safe." Bear nodded, still staring at her hand. "Reyes, that paper she's holding. You see what it is?" Reyes glanced over, figured it was just something to hold on to. Kids do that. Comfort thing. Maybe. Bear's eyes didn't move off it. But she hasn't let go of it once. Not one time. That ain't comfort. That's important. Reyes considered this, then shrugged. "You want to look at it?" "Yeah," Bear's voice came out lower than he meant it to. "I do." He stood, joints popping, and crossed the room slow and quiet, the way you'd approach a spooked animal. He crouched down next to the bench, careful not to let his shadow fall across her face. Up close, he could see the dark circles under her eyes, the faint scrape on her cheek she must have gotten scrambling around inside that armoire. His chest tightened. "Della," he whispered. No response. She was deep under. Gently, so gently his big rough hands looked almost delicate, he worked his fingers between hers. Her grip was still tight even in sleep, like her body remembered to hold on even when her mind had let go. It took a moment, easing her fingers back one at a time, before the paper came free. She stirred, murmured something that wasn't words, and settled back into sleep. Bear held his breath until she stilled. He stepped back toward the desk, the folded paper resting in his palm like it weighed more than it should. Reyes leaned in, curious now too. Bear unfolded it slow. The creases were soft from being opened and closed so many times, the paper thin in the fold lines like it might tear if he wasn't careful. Bits of it were smudged, like it had gotten wet once and dried again. The handwriting was small and looping, a woman's handwriting, careful like she'd taken her time with every letter. Bear's eyes moved down the lines, words about missing her, words about being sorry, words about waiting. And at the bottom, the signature. "Love always, Mom." Bear's whole body went still. The coffee cup in his other hand tilted, forgotten, hot liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. He thought about what Reyes had said earlier that day. Standing in the parking lot behind the diner, voice flat with the kind of tired disbelief cops got when nothing lined up right. Her mother's dead. Car accident, 2 years ago. It's in the report. Bear looked up at Reyes, and Reyes must have seen something change in his face, because his easy expression dropped clean off. "What?" Reyes said. "Bear, what is it?" Bear didn't answer right away. He just held the note out, his hand not quite steady, and pointed to the signature at the bottom with one thick finger. "You said her mother's dead." "She is," Reyes said slowly. "Then who," Bear said, voice low and hard, "wrote this letter?" The morning light came in weak through the police station's dusty windows. Bear sat on a hard plastic chair that was too small for his big frame, elbows on his knees, watching Della sleep. She had finally stopped shaking sometime around 3 in the morning. Now she looked almost peaceful. One small hand still curled loosely on top of the blanket, the other tucked under her cheek like a pillow. He hadn't slept at all. He kept thinking about the note. "Mom, 2 years dead," Reyes had said. But the ink on that paper looked fresh. The folds were soft, like it had been opened and closed 100 times, read and reread until the creases turned white. That wasn't the handwriting of a ghost. That was the handwriting of someone still fighting to be remembered. The station door opened, and a woman walked in carrying a thick folder and a laminated badge on a lanyard. She had tired eyes and a kind but no-nonsense face, the look of someone who had seen too many hard mornings to count. "Marcus Donovan?" she asked, glancing at Bear's leather cut and heavy boots like she was double-checking she had the right man. "That's me," Bear said, standing. "I'm Linda Ferris, Child Protective Services." She held out a hand, and he shook it careful, like he always did, aware of how big his hands were next to most people's. "I'm here for Della. We've got emergency foster placement set up for her this morning." Something in Bear's chest tightened, sudden and sharp, like a fist closing around his ribs. "She's still asleep," he said. which wasn't really an argument, just a stall. I understand. But we need to move quickly. It's protocol. As if she'd heard her name in her sleep, Della's eyes fluttered open. For a second she looked confused, blinking at the fluorescent lights, at the strange woman standing over her with a folder and a badge. Then her eyes found Bear, and something in her face cracked open with fear. "What's happening?" she whispered. "Della, honey," Linda said gently, crouching down to her level. "My name is Linda. I'm going to take you somewhere safe today, okay? A nice family is going to look after you for a little while." Della's whole body went rigid. She sat up fast, blanket falling off her shoulders, and before Bear could say anything, she had crossed the room and grabbed his hand with both of hers, gripping so hard her knuckles went white. "No," she said, voice cracking. "Please, don't let them take me. Please don't make me go with strangers, Della." Bear started, but his voice came out rough, unsteady. "Please," she said again, louder this time, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You found me. You said I was safe. Please don't let them take me away." Linda's face softened with practiced sympathy. "I know this is scary, sweetheart. But it's the safest option right now, until we can sort everything out." Bear looked down at Della's small hand wrapped around his own, like it was the only solid thing left in her whole world. He thought about the armoire, the duct tape, the silence she must have screamed into before he ever heard her. He thought about his own childhood, bouncing from house to house, nobody ever choosing to keep him. Something in him broke loose. Something he couldn't take back. "Wait," he said. Linda looked up at him. "I want to petition for emergency temporary guardianship." Myself, the room went dead quiet. Reyes, who had just walked in with 2 coffees, nearly dropped both cups. Linda's eyebrows shot up so high they nearly disappeared into her hairline. "Mr. Donovan, I don't think you understand what that entails." "I understand exactly what it entails," Bear said, his voice steady now, steadier than he felt. "I've got a clean record. I've got a home. And I've got a club full of people who'll back me up on this." As if summoned by the words themselves, the station door swung open and 3 of his club brothers walked in, leather jackets and all, filling the small room with their presence. They stopped short, staring at Bear with matching looks of shock. "Say that again?" one of them said. Della's grip on Bear's hand tightened, and for the first time since he'd pulled her out of that armoire, she looked like she might actually believe things could be okay. The courtroom smelled like old wood and floor polish. Bear sat on a hard bench in a clean shirt that his club brothers had ironed for him that morning, though none of them would ever admit to owning an iron. His hands, thick and scarred from years of engine work, felt too big for his lap. He kept folding and unfolding them, trying to look like a man who belonged in a place like this. He did not feel like that man. He felt like a fraud in a courtroom full of people who spoke in careful, practiced words. Judge Marion Whitaker sat behind her tall desk, glasses low on her nose, studying a folder of papers like they held the answer to a puzzle she did not yet trust. She had a reputation for being fair, but hard to move. Linda had warned him of that the night before, her voice tight with worry, even as she tried to sound hopeful. "Mr. Donovan," the judge said, looking up. "You understand what you are asking this court for?" "Yes, ma'am." Bear's voice came out rougher than he meant it to. He cleared his throat. "I'm asking to keep her safe. That's all I know how to do right now." The judge's eyes moved past him to the 2 rows of leather vests filling the benches behind. Big men with beards and tattoos, arms crossed, sitting straight as soldiers. Roy, the club president, had left his cut at home out of respect, wearing a plain black jacket instead. But nothing could hide the weight of him, the seriousness in his face as he waited his turn. "Miss Jennings," the judge said, calling Roy forward. "You're the president of Mr. Donovan's motorcycle club." "Yes, Your Honor." Roy's voice was calm, steady, the voice of a man used to being listened to. "I've known Bear 17 years. Never known a man with a bigger heart or less patience for cruelty. When he found that little girl, he didn't think twice. That's who he is." 2 more brothers spoke after him. One was a bail bondsman named Cutter, who talked about Bear's clean record, his steady work, the way he never missed a shift at the shop even when he had every reason to. The other was Freddie, quiet and thick-necked, who simply said, "Bear's the one you call when something's broken. He fixes it. Always has." Linda stood next, folder in hand, her voice careful but firm. She laid out the facts plainly. No criminal record. Steady income. A home inspection that had gone better than expected, the guest room already turned into something warm and welcoming, thanks to the wives' auxiliary and their sudden, fierce dedication to curtains and quilts. "It is unconventional," Linda admitted. "But in my professional opinion, Della's emotional attachment to Mr. Donovan is strong, and disrupting that bond right now could cause more harm than good." The judge was quiet for a long moment. She looked at Bear again, harder this time, like she was trying to see past the leather and the ink to whatever was underneath. "Mr. Donovan," she said, "why do you want this?" Truly, Bear thought of Della's small hand grabbing his in the police station, her voice breaking as she begged him not to let them take her. He thought of the years he'd spent bouncing through foster homes as a boy, learning that nobody stayed, that nobody chose you unless they had to. "Because somebody should choose her," he said. "Not because they have to. Because they want to. I want to." The courtroom was silent. Even Roy shifted, blinking hard. The judge closed the folder in front of her. "This court grants Mr. Donovan emergency temporary guardianship of the minor child Della, pending full investigation and review in 90 days. A ripple went through the leather vests behind him, low murmurs, one hard exhale from Cutter that sounded almost like a sob. Bear barely heard the rest. His ears were ringing. Outside, Della was waiting with one of the club aunties, sitting on the courthouse steps in a borrowed jacket 3 sizes too big. When she saw him come through the doors, she stood up fast, eyes wide, searching his face for the answer. He crouched down and took her small hand in his. "Come on, kid," he said. "Let's go home." Bear pulled the truck into his driveway and cut the engine. The house sat quiet under the porch light, a small brick place with a sagging gutter he kept meaning to fix. It wasn't much. But it was his, and tonight it had to be enough for someone else too. Della hadn't said a word the whole ride. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, staring out the window like she was memorizing the street in case she needed to run from it later. Bear understood that look. He'd worn it himself as a kid, more times than he liked to remember. "This is it," he said, opening her door. "Home base." She climbed out slow, her sneakers scuffing the gravel. She looked up at the house like it might bite her. "It ain't fancy," Bear said, rubbing the back of his neck. "But it's warm, and the fridge is full, and nobody's gonna lock any doors on you. Not while I'm here. Della's eyes flicked to him, just for a second. Then, back to the house. He led her up the walk and through the front door, flipping on lights as he went. The place smelled like coffee and engine oil, a combination he hadn't thought twice about until he saw Della's nose wrinkle. "Sorry," he muttered. "Not exactly perfume." He walked her down the short hallway to the spare room. He hadn't touched that room in years. Used to be full of boxes, spare parts, a broken treadmill he never used. 2 nights ago it had been nothing but clutter and dust. Now the door was painted a soft yellow, courtesy of Ruthie and Pam from the auxiliary, who had shown up unannounced with paint cans and casserole dishes and refused to let him lift a finger. They'd worked past midnight, laughing and bickering over throw pillows, while Bear sat in the garage pretending he wasn't listening to every word. He pushed the door open now and stepped back to let Della see. The bed was small, with a quilt covered in stars, and a lamp shaped like a moon sat glowing on the nightstand. A shelf held a row of stuffed animals, a little crooked, like they'd been arranged in a hurry. A stack of picture books sat on top of a dresser that still had the auxiliary's flower stickers half peeled off in one corner. Della stood in the doorway, not moving. "The ladies from my club," Bear said, awkward, hands shoved in his jacket pockets. "They wanted you to have something nice. Didn't know what you liked, so they just got a bit of everything." Della stepped inside slowly. She touched the quilt first, running her small fingers over the stitched stars. Then she picked up a stuffed rabbit from the shelf, holding it against her chest like she wasn't sure she was allowed to. "You can keep that," Bear said. "It's yours now." She didn't answer, but she held the rabbit a little tighter. "Bathroom's right there," he said, pointing down the hall. "Kitchen's got cereal, milk, all that. You need anything in the night, my room's right across the hall. Door stays open, okay?" "Always," Della nodded. Barely. He left her to settle in, busying himself in the kitchen with dishes that didn't need washing, giving her space. When he checked on her an hour later, she was sitting up in bed, rabbit clutched tight, eyes wide open in the dark. "You don't gotta sleep yet," Bear said quietly from the doorway. "Just rest, okay? I'm right here." She didn't cry that night. Not once. Bear sat outside her door long after her breathing turned slow and even, back against the wall, listening to the quiet like it was something fragile he might break. He thought about the note in her hand, the one signed Mom. He thought about the armoire, the tape, the silence nobody else had noticed. Somebody had done this to her. Somebody had left her to rot in the dark and called it discipline. Bear didn't know all the pieces yet, but he knew this much. He wasn't going to stop until he found out exactly who and why. He sat there in the hallway a long while, arms resting on his knees, the house quiet around him, and made himself a promise. Whatever it took, he'd find the truth. The house sat at the end of a cracked street, the kind of place where the grass grew wild in some yards and not at all in others. Number 14 had a sagging porch and a mailbox hanging crooked on one hinge, like it had given up trying to stand straight a long time ago. Bear parked his bike at the curb and sat there a moment, just looking at it. Officer Reyes pulled up behind him in his patrol car, badge catching the morning light. "You sure you want to do this?" Reyes asked, walking up. "I could go in alone." "She was in there," Bear said, nodding toward the house. "I want to see it." Reyes had the key from the property manager, since Russ Colton hadn't been seen in 3 days and rent was already late. The door creaked open into a house that smelled stale, like nobody had opened a window in months. The living room was bare, except for a recliner and a television. No pictures on the walls, no sign a child lived there at all, except for a single pair of small sneakers by the door, laces still tied the way you'd take them off in a hurry. Bear's jaw tightened at the sight of them. "Kitchen's clear," Riaz called from down the hall. "Bathroom too." "Come look at this bedroom." Bear followed him into a small room with a twin mattress on the floor and no sheets. A single window, painted shut. He noticed the lock on the outside of the door, the kind you'd put on a closet, not a bedroom. 9 years old, Bear muttered. Locked in her own room like a prisoner. Reyes said nothing, but his mouth was a hard line. They searched the rest of the house together, opening drawers, checking closets. Most of it was empty, like Russ had already started packing to disappear. But in the small desk shoved into the corner of what must have been Della's room, Bear found a drawer that stuck when he pulled it. He wiggled it loose and it slid open all at once, spilling out a stack of envelopes. "Reyes," Bear said, his voice low. "Come look at this." The officer crossed the room in 3 steps. Bear picked up the top envelope. It was addressed to Della in careful, looping handwriting. No return address, but a postmark from a town Bear had never heard of, somewhere across 3 state lines. He opened it with careful fingers, like it might crumble. Inside was a single page, folded twice. "My darling girl, I think about you every single day. I know you don't understand why I had to go, but I promise you, I am coming back for you. Just hold on a little longer. Be brave, the way I taught you. I love you more than anything in this world. Love always." Mom Bear's chest went tight. He set the letter down and picked up another. Same handwriting, same signature. He checked the postmarks. They were dated every few weeks, going back almost a year, all from the same small town. "Her mother's supposed to be dead," Reyes said quietly. "Car accident, 2 years back. It's in the file. Then who's been writing these?" Bear asked. He held up the stack, maybe 15 letters total, all opened, all read more than once judging by the soft, worn creases. "This isn't a stranger. This is somebody who knows this kid. Loves this kid." Reyes took one of the letters and studied the handwriting close, the way the letters slanted, the little heart drawn under the signature on one of them. "This is consistent," he said. "Every one of these, same pen pressure, same style. People don't usually get letters this regular from beyond the grave." Bear thought of the note Della had been clutching in the armoire, the one that started this whole thing. He pulled it from his jacket pocket, where he'd kept it since that first day, unfolded it next to the letters. Same handwriting. Same loop on the capital D. Same heart under the signature. "It's her," Bear said. "Whoever's been writing these, that's who left the note in the armoire, too." He picked the most recent letter, the one with the freshest postmark, and folded it carefully before slipping it into his jacket pocket. "Bear," Reyes said, a warning in his voice. "That's evidence. I'll give it to Linda. I'll give it to whoever needs it." Bear's eyes were hard now, all business, but I need to know where this town is. I need to know who's really out there. Reyes looked at him a long moment, then nodded slowly, like he'd made peace with something. "Handwriting's too consistent," he admitted. "Too personal. Whoever wrote these letters isn't dead, Bear, and I don't think she stopped loving that little girl for one single day." The clubhouse smelled like motor oil and coffee that had been sitting too long on the burner. Bear sat at the scarred wooden table in the back room, the letter from Russ Colton's drawer flattened out in front of him under a bare light bulb. He'd read it 11 times already. The handwriting looped soft and careful. Nothing like a man who taped a child inside a box. He pulled out his phone and made 3 calls. The first was to Whiskey, the club's tattoo artist, a wiry man with sleeves of faded ink and a cousin who worked dispatch for the state police 2 counties over. Whiskey answered on the second ring, already halfway through inking someone's forearm from the sound of the buzzing in the background. Bear. What's up, brother? Need a favor. Quiet one. Bear kept his voice low, even though nobody else was in the room. Guy named Russ Colton. I need to know if that name's real, or if it's something he made up. Can your cousin run it? Whiskey didn't hesitate. Give me the details. I'll call you back tonight. The second call went to Tiny, who was anything but a 6'6" tow truck driver who'd hauled half the broke-down cars in 3 counties and knew every back road and rest stop between here and the state line. Bear asked him to think hard. Had he ever picked up a car registered to a Russ Colton, or maybe under some other name at that same address on Miller Street? Let me check my logs, Tiny said. I keep records going back 2 years. Give me a day. The third call was the one that mattered most. Bear dialed Cutter, a bail bondsman who'd bonded out half the club at one point or another over the years, and who had a memory like a filing cabinet and friends in courthouses across 4 states. Cutter. It's Bear. Long time. Cutter's voice was gravelly, amused. You need bail money, or you just miss me? Neither. I need you to run a name. Full background. Any state you can reach. Russ Colton. Bear spelled it out. There's a kid involved. Cutter, a little girl. I think this guy's been lying about who he is for a long time. The amusement drained out of Cutter's voice. Give me his DOB if you got it. Address? Anything. Bear read off what he had from the paperwork Reyes had pulled at the house. Cutter grunted, said he'd make some calls, and hung up without saying goodbye, which was just how Cutter operated. Bear sat alone after that, turning the letter over in his hands. Della was in the next room, sitting with Big Mike's wife, Donna, who was teaching her how to braid a friendship bracelet out of embroidery thread. He could hear Della's voice through the wall, still quiet, but talking. Actually, talking. That alone felt like a small miracle. He thought about Della's face when she said the word mom like it was something fragile she was afraid to drop. He thought about the way she'd flinched when he first pulled her from that armoire, how her whole body had curled in on itself like a fist. Whoever Russ Colton really was, he'd done that to her. Bear intended to find out exactly who that was. The night stretched on. Whiskey called back around 9, apologetic. His cousin hadn't found anything solid yet. Records were slow, but she was still digging. Tiny called an hour after that. Same story, nothing yet, but he wasn't done looking either. It was almost midnight when Cutter finally called back, and the second Bear heard his voice, he knew something had broken loose. Bear, you sitting down? Just tell me. Your guy. Russ Colton? That's not his name. Not originally. Papers rustled on Cutter's end, like he was reading straight off a printout. Real name's Russell Combs. Got a record 2 states over, going back almost 6 years. Assault charges, some dropped, some not. And get this, 3 restraining orders filed against him, all from the same woman. Bear's grip tightened on the phone. Who? Name's Anne Whitfield, Cutter said. Filed the first one 5 years ago. Filed the last one about 2 years back, right before she dropped off the map completely. The days settled into something Bear had never expected. A rhythm. A routine. Something that felt, strange as it was, like family. Every morning, Della sat on the workbench in the clubhouse garage, swinging her legs, watching Bear work on his bike. He didn't push. He never pushed. He just talked while he worked, showed her things, and let her decide if she wanted to come closer. "You want to know a secret?" he asked one morning, wiping grease off his hands with a rag. "This bike runs better than most people take care of themselves. You gotta check on it. Same as anything you love." Della tilted her head. "Like watering plants?" "Exactly like that." He handed her a small flashlight. "Hold this. I'm gonna show you how to check the oil." She held the light steady while he pulled the dipstick, and when he explained what the numbers meant, she listened like it was the most important thing in the world. By the end of the week, she could check it herself, sliding the dipstick out with a seriousness that made the other bikers chuckle from across the garage. "She's gonna be running this whole place by Christmas," said Tiny, a 300-pound biker with a beard like a bird's nest, grinning at her. Della didn't smile back, not yet, but Bear caught the corner of her mouth twitch. Progress. In the evenings, he taught her how to whittle. Nothing sharp, nothing dangerous, just a small pocket knife and a soft piece of pine, guiding her hands until she carved her first shape, a lopsided little bird. "It's not very good," she said, frowning at it. "First one never is," Bear said. "But look, it's got wings. That's the important part." She held on to that bird like it was made of gold. The following Saturday, the club threw a cookout behind the garage. Smoke curled up from the grill, and the smell of burgers and barbecue chicken drifted across the lot. Someone had strung up old string lights between 2 poles, and a radio played classic rock from a cracked speaker. Della sat at a picnic table, picking at her food, quiet as always, watching the bikers laugh and tell stories. Then Tiny, trying to flip a burger with a spatula that was too small, sent it flying off the grill and onto the ground, where it landed with a wet smack right in front of his boots. The whole yard went silent for half a second. Then Della laughed. It came out of nowhere, a real laugh, bright and surprised, like it had been buried so deep she didn't know she still had it. She covered her mouth with both hands, but it kept coming, bubbling up until her shoulders shook. Bear looked over, and something in his chest cracked open. He hadn't heard that sound before. Not once. Not since the day he found her in that armoire. Tiny bowed like he'd done it on purpose, and the whole yard erupted in laughter, and Della kept giggling long after the moment passed, wiping her eyes like she couldn't believe she was doing it either. Bear didn't say anything. He just sat down next to her, and for the rest of the night, she stayed close to him, leaning into his arm when she got tired, watching the fire crackle in an old barrel someone had turned into a fire pit. Later, after most of the club had gone home and the lights had been turned off one by one, Bear carried her back to his place on his shoulders, her small arms wrapped loosely around his forehead. He set her down on the porch steps and sat beside her. The night quiet, except for the crickets. Della was quiet for a long moment, staring up at the stars. "Bear," she said softly. "Do you think my mom's really alive?" Bear felt the question land heavy in his chest. He could have lied, could have told her some soft, easy thing to make her sleep better. But he wouldn't. Not to her. Not ever. I don't know for sure yet, he said, voice low and steady. But I promise you this, we're gonna find out the truth. Together, no matter what it takes. Della looked at him, her eyes searching his face like she was trying to decide if she could believe him. Together, she repeated, like she was trying the word on for size. Together, Bear said again, and meant it more than he'd meant anything in a long, long time. The address led them to a strip mall on the edge of town, the kind with a nail salon, a check cashing place, and a small office with blinds always shut. The sign on the door just said Community Outreach Services. No name. No hours listed. Bear parked his bike at the curb. Officer Reyes pulled in beside him in his cruiser, out of uniform today, just jeans and a jacket. They'd agreed it would look less scary that way. You sure this is the place? Bear asked. Reyes checked the paper in his hand. The old restraining order filing had a caseworker's initials on it. M.T. It took 3 days of phone calls and one favor from a friend at the courthouse to trace those initials to a name. Marissa Tran. This is it, Reyes said. But don't expect a warm welcome. Places like this don't exactly advertise. People's lives depend on staying hidden. Bear nodded. He understood that better than most. Inside, the office was small and plain. A woman sat behind a desk, maybe in her 50s, with kind eyes but a face that had learned to be careful. She looked up when the bell over the door rang, and Bear watched her gaze flick to his leather vest, his tattoos, the size of him filling the doorway. We're closing soon, she said, though the sign in the window still said open. Reyes stepped forward first, showing his badge. Ma'am, I'm Officer Reyes. This is Marcus Donovan. We're not here to cause trouble. We're trying to help a little girl. The woman's eyes moved between them. I don't discuss clients. Not with police, not with anyone. We're not asking about a client, Bear said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. He cleared his throat and tried again, softer. We're asking about a woman. Her name might have been Anne Whitfield. 2 years ago. She might have come through here. Something flickered behind the woman's eyes. Just a flash, gone as quick as it came. But Bear caught it. I don't know that name, she said. Bear pulled out his phone. He'd taken a photo of Della weeks ago, the two of them sitting on the porch steps at the clubhouse, Della grinning with a gap in her teeth Bear hadn't noticed until she smiled. He turned the screen toward the woman. This is her daughter, Bear said. Della, she's 9. She spent 4 days locked in a piece of furniture because a man wanted to punish her mother for trying to reach her. That little girl asked me last night if I thought her mom was still alive. I promised her I'd find out. The woman's careful face cracked, just slightly, at the corners of her eyes. I'm not police, Bear went on. I'm not here to arrest anybody or drag anybody back to a life they ran from. I just want to know if a mother and daughter can be together again. That's all. That's the whole thing. The room went quiet. Somewhere outside, a car alarm chirped twice and stopped. The woman looked at Reyes, like she was asking him something without words. Reyes gave a small nod, the kind that said he trusted Bear, that this man was telling the truth. She let out a breath and stood, walking to the door to flip the sign to closed. Then she pulled the blinds the rest of the way down, even though they were already mostly shut. My name is Marissa, she said quietly, sitting back down. I worked with a network back then, women who needed to disappear, really disappear, not just move to another town and hope. We're talking new names, new histories, sometimes even faked deaths when the danger was bad enough. Bear's chest tightened. And Anne? Marissa was quiet for a long moment, her fingers pressed together on the desk like she was praying or bracing herself. There was a woman, she finally said. Different name back then, but I remember her case. Her husband, the one she was running from, he was the kind that would never stop looking. Not ever. The kind who saw a woman leaving as a personal insult he had to punish. Bear's jaw tightened. That sounded exactly like Russ. We helped her stage a car accident, Marissa said. Made it look real enough that even the county believed it. She had to leave everything behind. Everything. Her eyes flicked up to meet Bear's, including a daughter she thought was coming with her. The words hit Bear like a fist to the chest. She's alive, Marissa said. Or she was 2 years ago. Living under a new name. I can't tell you where. Not yet. Not until I know for sure this isn't some kind of trap. Marissa sat behind her cluttered desk for a long moment after Bear finished talking. Her fingers were laced together so tight her knuckles had gone pale. On the wall behind her hung a faded poster about a hotline number, the kind you'd see in a laundromat or a gas station bathroom. Bear had noticed a lot of posters like that since this whole thing started. He was starting to see the world different now. Noticing things he never used to. I need you to understand something, Marissa said finally. The women I help, they don't get to have mistakes. One wrong move, one person talking to the wrong person, and it isn't just an inconvenience. It can get somebody killed. I know, Bear said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. I'm not asking you to trust me because I look trustworthy. I know I don't. But there's a 9-year-old girl sitting in a clubhouse full of bikers right now, waiting to find out if her mom is alive. I need you to trust that. Reyes, standing by the door with his arms crossed, spoke up quiet. Marissa, I've known you 3 years. I've never seen you break protocol for anybody. I'm not asking you to break it now. I'm asking you to make one phone call to somebody who might know somebody. That's all. Marissa looked at Bear a long time. Really looked at him. The way people did when they were trying to see past the leather and the ink and the size of him to whatever was underneath. Whatever she saw seemed to settle something in her. Because she picked up her phone. I'm not promising anything, she said, already dialing. She talked low into the phone for almost 10 minutes, walking to the far corner of her office like the extra distance might keep her words private. Bear caught pieces. A name that wasn't Anne's. A description of a little girl with brown eyes. The words she has a right to know said soft and urgent. When she hung up, her face had changed. Something had cracked open in it. Some door that had been shut a long time. There's a woman living in a fishing town called Cedar Cove, Marissa said. Works at a diner near the water. Goes by Anne Marsh now. She came through the network 2 years ago, right around the time you're talking about. I can't swear it's her. But the description matches. Brown hair, quiet, keeps mostly to herself. Nobody's heard from her since she settled in, which is usually a good sign. Means she's safe. She wrote the town's name on a slip of paper and slid it across the desk like it weighed 100 pounds. Cedar Cove, she said. 3 states over. That's all I've got, and that's all I'm going to be able to get you. Please, for her sake and for Della's, be careful how you go about this. Bear folded the paper and put it in his jacket pocket like it was something precious. You have my word. The ride home felt different than any ride he'd ever taken. The road stretched out gray and familiar under his wheels, same as always, but everything in him was buzzing like a live wire. He kept touching his pocket to make sure the paper was still there, like it might disappear if he stopped checking. When he got to the clubhouse, Della was sitting on the porch steps with Big Mike's wife, June, braiding a friendship bracelet out of yarn. She looked up when she heard his bike, and something in her face went still and hopeful the second she saw his eyes. "Della," Bear said, kneeling down in front of her so they were eye level. "I need to talk to you about something important." She set the yarn down slow, like she already knew this moment mattered. "We might have found her," Bear said. "Your mom. There's a woman living in a town called Cedar Cove who might be her. I can't promise it's true yet. But it's the best lead we've got, and I think it's worth going to find out." For a second, Della didn't move at all. Then her chin started to tremble, and her eyes filled up fast, spilling over before she could stop them. "You mean it?" she whispered. "You really think it could be her?" "I think it's worth finding out," Bear said again, gentle. "But Della, listen to me. We can't know for sure until we get there." "I don't care," she said, and her voice cracked wide open with hope she couldn't hold back anymore. "Please, Bear, please, can we go now? Can we go today?" Bear looked at her tear-streaked face, at the fierce and desperate hope shining there, and felt his own throat go tight. "Yeah," he said. "We're going. Let's go pack your things." The sun wasn't even all the way up when Bear rolled the sidecar rig out of the clubhouse garage. It was borrowed from Tiny, a brother who used it to haul his dog to the lake, and it still smelled faintly like wet fur. Bear had scrubbed it down twice anyway. Della stood on the cracked pavement in a jacket 2 sizes too big, borrowed from one of the auntie's grandkids, watching him check the straps and bolts like her life depended on it. Which, in a way, it did. "You nervous?" Bear asked, not looking up from the wheel he was checking. "A little," Della said. Then, quieter, "What if she doesn't want me anymore?" Bear stopped what he was doing. He crouched down so he was eye level with her, which took some doing given his size. "That's not a thing that's gonna happen," he said. "A mother don't stop wanting her kid. Not ever. You hear me?" Della nodded, but her eyes were wet. He helped her into the sidecar, checking the straps twice, then a third time. He pulled the helmet down over her head, adjusted the chin strap so it wasn't too tight, and tapped the top of it twice like he was sealing a promise. "You ready, kid?" "Ready," she said. And for the first time that morning, she smiled. The bike roared to life underneath him, and they pulled out onto the highway just as the sky was turning from gray to gold. The first day was mostly quiet. Della watched the world go by from her little pod beside him, farmland turning to hills, hills turning to long stretches of nothing but sky and road. Every hour or so Bear would glance down to check on her, and every time she'd give him a thumbs up, her small hand poking out from under a blanket someone's wife had packed for her. They stopped for gas around noon, and Della finally spoke over the wind noise. "Bear, how far is a state?" He laughed, a real laugh, deep and warm. "Depends on the state. Some are big, some are small. We got 3 to get through before we hit the coast. That's a lot of state." "Sure is." By evening, they'd put a good chunk of miles behind them. Bear found a motel just off the highway, the kind with a flickering sign and a parking lot full of cracks, but it was clean enough and the woman at the desk didn't ask too many questions about the giant biker and the little girl checking in together. Bear had learned to keep a folder of guardianship papers handy for exactly that reason. After they'd settled into their room, 2 beds separated by a nightstand with a lamp that buzzed, Bear's stomach growled loud enough that Della giggled. "Guess that means dinner," he said. They walked to a diner across the street, one of those places with red vinyl booths and a jukebox that hadn't worked in years. Della slid into the booth across from him, swinging her legs since they didn't reach the floor. "Order whatever you want," Bear told her, sliding the menu across. She ordered a grilled cheese and a chocolate milkshake, and Bear got a burger the size of his fist. While they waited, Della started asking him questions, the kind kids ask when they're finally comfortable enough to be curious. "Why do you ride a motorcycle?" "Because cars are boring," Bear said, and she laughed. "Why do you have so many tattoos? Each one's got a story. I'll tell you one someday, when you're older." "Were you scared of anything when you were my age?" Bear thought about that one a long moment, his fork hovering over his plate. "Yeah," he said finally. "I was scared nobody was ever gonna want me around. Guess that's why I understand you a little bit." Della didn't say anything to that, but she reached across the table and put her small hand on top of his big rough one, just for a second. Their food came, and the conversation turned lighter. Bear told her about Tiny's dog, who once ate an entire birthday cake off a table, and Della laughed so hard milkshake nearly came out of her nose, which made Bear laugh too, a big booming sound that turned heads at the counter. By the time they walked back to the motel, full and tired, the night sky was full of stars neither of them could see back in the city. Della yawned as she climbed into her bed, pulling the scratchy blanket up to her chin. "Bear?" "Yeah, kid?" "Today was the best day I ever had." Bear sat there a moment in the dark, feeling something in his chest crack open in the best possible way. "Mine too," he said. "Now get some sleep. Big day tomorrow." The road curved along the coastline all afternoon, and the smell of salt water crept into everything. Bear's jacket, Della's hair, the air itself. He'd never seen the ocean do that to a person before, but Della kept turning her head toward it every time it peeked through the trees, like she couldn't get enough of it. By the time they rolled into the little town, the sun was starting to dip low, painting the sky orange and pink. The town was small. A grocery store, a hardware shop, a diner with a faded sign, houses with peeling paint and gardens out front. It felt like the kind of place where nothing bad could find you. Bear hoped that was true. He pulled the bike over near a corner and checked the address Marissa had given him, written on a scrap of paper he'd folded and unfolded so many times the creases were soft as cloth. His hands were steady on the handlebars, but inside, his stomach was doing something he didn't have a name for. Nerves, maybe, or hope. Sometimes those two things felt the same. "This is it?" Della asked. Her voice was small. "This is it," Bear said. He helped her out of the sidecar and took off her helmet, smoothing down her hair where it had gotten mussed. She looked up at him, and for a second he saw all the fear come rushing back into her eyes. What if it wasn't her? What if this whole trip had been for nothing? What if hope was about to break her heart all over again? "Hey," Bear said, crouching down so he was eye level with her. "Whatever happens, I'm right here. You're not doing this alone. Okay?" Della nodded, but she didn't say anything. She reached out and took his hand, holding it tight, and they started walking together down the quiet street. The house was small, painted a soft blue, with white trim around the windows. A garden ran along the front of it, full of flowers Bear couldn't name, purples and yellows and pinks all mixed together like someone had thrown a rainbow at the dirt and let it grow wild. And there, kneeling in the middle of it all, was a woman. She had her back to them, digging into the soil with a small trowel, a sun hat shading her face. Her hair was different than the photo Bear had seen, shorter, a different color. But something about the way she moved, the tilt of her shoulders, made his heart start pounding. Della stopped walking. Her hand tightened around Bear's like a vice. "Mom?" she whispered. It was barely a sound, barely more than breath. But somehow, the woman in the garden heard it. She went still. Her shoulders stiffened. Slowly, like she was afraid to believe her own ears, she turned around. For a moment, nobody moved. The woman's eyes locked onto Della, and her face went through something Bear had never seen before. Shock, disbelief, terror, joy, all crashing into each other at once. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. The trowel slipped from her fingers and fell into the dirt. "Della," she finally choked out, the word breaking apart in her throat. And then she was moving, scrambling up from the ground, her knees giving out halfway so she half fell, half crawled across the garden, dirt staining her jeans, her hands shaking as she reached out. Della let go of Bear's hand and ran. They collided in the middle of the flowers, Anne's arms wrapping around her daughter so tight it looked like she was afraid Della might disappear if she let go for even a second. Anne collapsed the rest of the way to her knees, pulling Della down with her, both of them sinking into the soft dirt and petals, sobbing into each other's shoulders. "You're here. You're really here," Anne cried, her hands cupping Della's face like she needed to memorize every inch of it. I thought I'd never. Oh, my baby girl." "Mommy," Della sobbed, the word coming out broken, and small and full of 2 years of missing someone so much it hurt. "I knew you weren't gone. I knew it." Bear stood a few feet back, at the edge of the garden, and did not move. He didn't want to intrude on something this sacred. His chest felt tight, full up with something he didn't have words for. Joy and ache tangled together so close he couldn't tell where one ended and the other began. He watched the two of them clinging to each other in the flowers, crying and laughing all at once, and felt his own eyes burn. He'd done it. He'd brought her home. The kitchen smelled like garlic and butter, and the little house creaked in the wind coming off the ocean. Anne had put a pot of soup on the stove without even thinking, her hands moving on their own while her eyes stayed locked on Della, like she was scared the girl might vanish if she looked away too long. Bear sat in the corner on a wooden chair too small for him, trying to take up as little space as possible. This was not his moment. He knew that. But Della kept glancing over at him every few seconds, like she needed to check he was still there, and each time he gave her a small nod. "Still here, kid." Anne set 3 bowls on the table, her hands shaking so bad the spoons rattled against the ceramic. She sat down across from Della, reached out, and touched her daughter's cheek like she was checking she was real. "I need to tell you something," Anne said, her voice cracking. "Both of you. You deserve to know the truth." She wrapped her fingers around her mug of tea like it was the only thing keeping her steady. "Russ wasn't always like that," she started. "Not at first. But it got worse. Slow. Then all at once. He controlled everything. Where I went. Who I talked to. What I wore." Her eyes dropped to the table. "I was so scared, Della, scared he'd hurt me bad enough that you'd grow up without a mom at all." Della sat very still, listening with the kind of quiet focus only a kid who'd learned to survive by paying attention could manage. There was a woman, Anne continued. Marissa, she ran a network that helped women like me disappear. Get away from men like him for good. It's not something you do lightly. Faking your death, changing your name, leaving everything behind. Her voice broke, leaving you behind. But the plan was never for me to leave you, baby. The plan was for both of us to go together. That night, I had a bag packed for you too. Tears rolled down her face, and she didn't wipe them away. Something went wrong. Russ came home early. I only had time to get myself out before he'd have caught us both. I promised Marissa's people I'd come back for you within days. I thought I would. She pressed a hand over her mouth for a second, steadying herself. But Russ moved fast. He got a lawyer, twisted the story so it looked like I was an unfit mother who'd run off. By the time the network could try again, he'd hidden you. Changed your school, changed towns. I didn't know where you were for months. I thought you were dead, Della whispered. Everyone said, I know, baby. I know he told you that. I tried to send letters. Through people who could get them to you without him knowing. I don't know how many you got. Della's small hand slid across the table and found her mother's. I got some, she said. I kept them. That's why he locked me up. Because I still believed you were alive. Anne made a sound like something breaking inside her chest, and she pulled Della into her arms, both of them crying without any shame about it. Bear looked down at his soup, giving them privacy even though there was nowhere else in the small kitchen to look. His throat felt tight. He thought about the folded note Della had been clutching in that armoire, how he'd known even then that this was bigger than one bad man locking up one scared kid. After a while, Anne looked up at him, wiping her face with her sleeve. Thank you, she said. It wasn't the first time she'd said it since they arrived, and it wouldn't be the last that night. You didn't have to do any of this. You could have called the police and walked away. Most people would have. Couldn't do that, Bear said simply. You gave her back to me, Anne said. I don't know how I'll ever repay that. Bear just nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude, and reached for his spoon. They ate together as the wind pushed against the windows, the three of them quiet now, worn out from crying and driving and feeling too much all at once. Della sat between the two adults, glancing between them like she still couldn't believe both of them were real and in the same room. Bear watched Anne reach over and tuck a piece of hair behind Della's ear, the kind of small automatic motion only a mother makes, and something in his chest pulled tight. They had each other now. Truly, fully, the way they were supposed to. Which meant somewhere in the coming days, there'd be no reason for him to stay. 2 days had passed, and the little house by the sea had started to feel like something new was growing inside it. Something soft. Something safe. Bear stood in the small guest room, folding the one flannel shirt he'd brought with him and tucking it into his saddlebag. The morning light came through the window in a warm yellow stripe, falling across the quilt on the bed, the same quilt Della had wrapped herself in every night since they'd arrived. He could hear her laughing in the kitchen, a sound that still surprised him every time he heard it. 2 weeks ago, she barely spoke above a whisper. Now she laughed like any 9-year-old girl should. He told himself this was good. This was right. Anne needed to be a mother again, without a giant biker taking up space in her kitchen. Della needed her mom, not some old outlaw sleeping on her couch. He'd done his job. He'd found them, He'd brought them together. That was supposed to be enough. So why did his chest feel like someone had wrapped a chain around it? He zipped the saddlebag shut and walked out to the kitchen, where Anne was pouring orange juice into 3 glasses, and Della was sitting at the table drawing a picture of a motorcycle with a sidecar. She'd added a little cartoon version of herself waving from inside it, helmet way too big for her head, just like it had been on the road. "You're really leaving today?" Anne asked, not looking up from the juice. "Figured I'd give you two some room," Bear said. "You don't need an old biker cluttering up your porch." "You're not clutter," Della said without looking up from her drawing. "You're Bear." He felt something twist behind his ribs. He opened his mouth to say something back. Something easy. Something that wouldn't crack his voice. But before he could, the low growl of a car engine rolled up outside the house. Anne's head snapped toward the window. Bear saw her whole body go still, the way a deer goes still right before it bolts. "Anne?" he said. She didn't answer. She was staring through the curtain, her face draining of color like someone had pulled a plug somewhere inside her. Bear moved to the window and looked out. A dark blue sedan sat crooked in the driveway, one tire up on the grass like whoever parked it hadn't cared to do it right. The driver's door swung open. Russ Colton stepped out. Bear had never seen the man in person, only in the photographs Reyes had pulled up during the investigation. But he recognized him instantly. The stiff posture, the tight jaw, the eyes that looked like they were always calculating something, always looking for the next thing to control. "That's him," Anne whispered. Her voice had gone thin as paper. "That's Russ." Della's crayon stopped moving. She looked up slowly, and Bear watched the fear come back into her face, the same fear he'd seen the day he pulled her out of that armoire. It was like watching a light switch flip backward. "He can't be here," Anne said, her hands starting to shake. "He can't know where we are. How does he know where we are?" Bear's stomach dropped as the answer hit him. The guardianship paperwork, his name, his petition, filed with the court back home. A paper trail. He'd been so careful about everything else, and he'd missed that. "Anne, listen to me," he started, but Russ was already at the door, his fist slamming against the wood so hard the whole frame rattled. "Anne, I know you're in there." His voice was a snarl, rough and furious. "You thought you could hide from me? You thought a dead woman gets to just walk around living her life?" Anne backed away from the door like it had turned into fire. Her hands came up over her mouth, and she started shaking her head, over and over, like if she shook it enough this wouldn't be real. "Open the damn door," Russ shouted, pounding again. "I want my daughter. You hear me? Della belongs with me." Della's crayon fell from her hand and rolled off the table. Her chair scraped back as she scrambled up, eyes wide with terror, and she screamed the only word that mattered to her right now. "Bear." He was already moving, boots pounding across the kitchen floor toward the door, his whole body going hard and steady the way it did before a fight. Every instinct in him rising up to stand between that door and the two people inside this house he had come to love more than he ever thought he could. Bear moved fast for a big man. He crossed the small living room in 3 steps and put himself between Russ Colton and the two people he loved most in the world. "That's far enough," Bear said. His voice was low and steady, like gravel settling. "You're not coming in this house." Russ stood in the doorway, chest heaving, his face red and twisted with a fury that had clearly been building for 2 years. He was a tall man, thin in a wiry way, with the kind of eyes that never quite settled on one thing. He looked past Bear at Anne, who stood frozen by the kitchen counter with one arm wrapped around Della. "You think you can just disappear?" Russ shouted at her, ignoring Bear entirely, as if the 300 pounds of leather and muscle in front of him was nothing but furniture. "You think faking your own death makes you clever? I found you. I always find you." "Russ, please," Anne said, her voice shaking. "Just leave. Just leave us alone." "Leave?" he laughed, a sharp, ugly sound. "After what you did? After all those letters?" Bear felt something cold settle in his stomach. "What letters?" Russ's eyes finally landed on him, sizing him up, sneering. "She's been writing to the kid. Sneaking letters through some network of do-gooders. Thought I didn't know. Thought I was stupid." He jabbed a finger toward Della, who pressed herself harder into her mother's side. "You know why she ended up in that box? Because her mother couldn't keep her mouth shut. Because every time a letter showed up, I had to teach a lesson." The words landed like a punch to Bear's gut. He had suspected there was more to the armoire, more reason than simple cruelty. Now he had it, straight from the man's own twisted mouth. "You locked a 9-year-old kid in a piece of furniture," Bear said, his voice dropping even lower, "to punish her mother for loving her. She needed to learn." Russ snapped. "They both did." "She's a child," Bear said. She screamed for hours. She thought she was going to die in there. Something in Russ's face flickered, just for a second, like maybe some small piece of him understood how that sounded out loud. Then it hardened again, replaced by pure rage. "This isn't your business," Russ spat. "You're nobody. Some biker who found a stray. That's my family. My wife. My kid." "She's not your kid," Bear said. "And she's not your wife. Not anymore." Della whimpered, and the sound seemed to snap something loose in Russ. His whole body went rigid, and then he moved, lunging past Bear toward Anne and Della with his hand raised. Bear didn't think. He just acted, the way he'd been trained to act his whole life, first by necessity and later by choice. He caught Russ mid-stride, wrapping one thick arm around his chest and using his weight to pull him sideways, away from the women. Russ thrashed, swinging an elbow that caught Bear in the ribs, but Bear held on, walking him backward toward the door, careful, controlled, not trying to hurt him, just trying to stop him. "Let go of me." Russ screamed, spit flying from his mouth. "Let go, you son of a..." "Not happening," Bear grunted, pinning Russ's arms with practiced ease, the same calm control he'd use breaking up a bar fight at the clubhouse. He kept his own breathing steady, kept his voice level even as Russ bucked against him. "You're done. You hear me?" Done. That was when the sirens came, red and blue lights washing across the front of the house, cutting through the porch shadows. 2 patrol cars screeched to a stop at the curb, and officers spilled out, hands on their weapons, shouting for everyone to stay where they were. Bear released Russ into the arms of the nearest officer, stepping back with his hands raised to show he meant no harm. Russ didn't go quietly. He thrashed against the officers as they wrestled his arms behind his back, cuffs clicking into place. "This isn't over." Russ bellowed, twisting his neck to glare back at the house, at Anne standing frozen in the doorway, at Della peeking out from behind her mother's legs. "You hear me? This isn't over. I'll be back. I'll find you again." The officers hauled him toward the patrol car, his threats echoing down the quiet street, but his boots dragged uselessly against the pavement, all his fury finally caught, finally contained. The porch light buzzed above them, moths knocking against the glass. Bear sat on the front steps of Anne's little house, his hands still shaking from the fight, when a state police cruiser pulled up behind the last of the flashing lights. A tall man in a gray suit got out. He walked like someone who had done this 100 times before, slow and sure, a folder tucked under his arm. He didn't look at Russ, who was being shoved into the back of a squad car, still yelling. He looked at Bear. Marcus Donovan? Bear stood up. That's me. Investigator Hale, State Police. He held out a hand, and Bear shook it, though his grip felt weaker than usual. I need to talk to you about the guardianship paperwork you filed. Bear's stomach dropped. Okay. Hale opened the folder. You filed for emergency temporary guardianship of the minor, Della, in your home state. That's fine on its own. But you crossed state lines with her. Multiple times, it looks like, chasing down leads on her mother. You didn't notify the court. You didn't get permission from CPs to transport her outside jurisdiction. I didn't know I needed to, Bear said. His voice came out rougher than he meant it to. I was trying to find her mom. I understand that. Hale's voice was calm, almost kind, but the words still landed like stones. And for what it's worth, what you did, finding her mother after 2 years, that's not nothing. But the law doesn't care about intentions. It cares about process. You bypassed it. That opens you up to some real problems. Custodial interference, at minimum. Possibly more, depending on how the judge back home wants to handle it. Bear looked past him, to the house, where the curtains were drawn but a thin line of light showed underneath. Somewhere inside, Della was probably curled up next to Anne, finally safe. Finally home. So what happens now? Bear asked. Now? You go home. You sort out your paperwork. You get a lawyer if you got one. And you wait for a hearing. Hale closed the folder. I'm not going to cuff you tonight, Mr. Donovan. What you did tonight, stepping in like that, probably saved this family. But I'd be lying if I said this was over. Bear nodded slowly, though the words sat heavy in his chest like wet sand. Hale left soon after, taillights disappearing down the dark road. Bear stood alone on the porch for a long time before he found the courage to go inside. Anne was sitting at the kitchen table, Della asleep with her head in her mother's lap. One small hand curled around a fold of Anne's sweater. Anne looked up when Bear stepped in, her eyes red but calm now. Everything okay? She asked quietly. Bear pulled a chair out and sat across from her. He kept his voice low so he wouldn't wake Della. I gotta go back home tomorrow, Anne. Straighten some things out. Legal stuff. About the guardianship. Anne's face fell. Is it bad? Could be. He rubbed a hand over his jaw. I crossed lines I wasn't supposed to cross. Didn't mean to. Just wanted to get her to you. He looked down at Della, so peaceful now, so far from the terrified girl in the armoire. Guess I didn't think it through. Bear, Anne reached across the table and put her hand over his. Her fingers were small compared to his, but steady. You saved her life. Whatever happens with the paperwork, that doesn't change. Feels like it might, he said. Feels like the second I fix this, they're gonna tell me I got no business being part of her life anymore. That I'm just some guy who found her in a box. You're not just some guy. Anne's voice cracked. You're the reason we're sitting here together." Bear didn't answer. He just looked at Della's small hand resting against her mother's sweater, and he felt something inside him ache in a way he didn't have words for. "I'll stay in touch," he said finally. "Call you. Check in. However this shakes out, I ain't disappearing." Anne squeezed his hand once, tight, like she believed him. Bear wasn't sure he believed himself. The next morning, the sky was gray and soft with fog rolling in off the coast. Bear stood beside his motorcycle in the driveway, helmet under one arm, watching Della sleep through the window instead of waking her to say goodbye. He couldn't stand the thought of her crying. He swung his leg over the bike, started the engine, and rode away as the sun tried to break through the clouds, feeling every mile like a mile further from where he belonged. The house was too quiet. Bear sat in the kitchen with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. The clock on the wall ticked louder than it used to. Or maybe he just noticed it now, because there was nothing else to fill the silence. Down the hall, the spare room still had the little string of paper stars taped to the wall. Della had made them one rainy afternoon with the club's help, cutting yellow construction paper into crooked points, while Big Joe held the tape roll and pretended his hands were too big for the job. There was a nightlight shaped like a moon plugged into the wall socket, still glowing faint gold even in the daylight. Bear hadn't been able to bring himself to take it down. He hadn't been able to bring himself to do a lot of things since he got back. 3 days now. 3 days of waking up and reaching for his phone to check if Della had texted him a picture of something silly, then remembering there was no reason for her to. She was safe. She was with her mother. That was the whole point. That was what he'd wanted for her since the moment he pulled her out of that armoire. So why did it feel like something had been ripped out of his chest? A knock came at the door, heavy and familiar. Bear didn't move right away. The knock came again, and then the door just opened. Because none of his brothers ever waited for an invitation. Tiny walked in first, which was a joke of a name for a man built like a refrigerator. Behind him came Rooster and Doc, the club's unofficial medic, who'd probably driven over the second Tiny called him and said Bear wasn't picking up his phone. "You look like hell," Tiny said, dropping into the chair across from Bear like he owned the place. "Thanks. You eat today?" Bear didn't answer, which was answer enough. Doc sighed and started opening cabinets, pulling out a pan, a carton of eggs Bear didn't remember buying. Rooster leaned against the counter with his arms crossed, watching Bear with the kind of careful eyes you'd use on a horse that might spook. "You did the right thing," Rooster said finally. "Getting her to her mom. That's not nothing, Bear. Doesn't feel like it." "It ain't supposed to feel like nothing. It's supposed to feel like this." Tiny gestured vaguely at Bear's whole slumped posture. Feeling like garbage means you did something that mattered. If it didn't matter, you wouldn't feel a thing. Bear almost smiled at that. Almost, Doc set a plate of eggs in front of him without asking, the way you'd feed a stray dog that wandered onto your porch. Gentle but firm about it. "Eat," he said. "Then we're going to talk about this hearing." "Nothing to talk about." "Lawyer says it don't look good. I crossed state lines without filing the right paperwork. Could be considered obstruction, could be considered a dozen things. Judge might not even let me keep visitation rights, let alone anything more." "Then we show up," Rooster said simply. "All of us. Every patch in this chapter, and half the ones from the next county over too. This ain't your fight. Everything that matters to you is our fight," Tiny said, and there wasn't a shred of humor in it now. You think we forgot who drove 3 hours in the rain to bail my nephew out when nobody else would? Who sat with Doc's mother in the hospital so he didn't have to do it alone? You've been showing up for this club for 20 years, Bear. Now it's our turn. Bear stared down at the eggs, throat tight. He didn't trust himself to say anything, so he just nodded, and that seemed to be enough for them. His phone buzzed on the table. He almost let it ring out, tired of bad news, tired of lawyers and paperwork and jurisdiction. But the screen showed a name that made his chest tighten in a different way. Anne, he answered on the second ring. Hey, Bear. Her voice was steady, stronger than he remembered from the coastal town. I'm coming to your hearing. He blinked. Anne, you don't have to do that. It's a mess. It's not your problem to fix. It's exactly my problem, she said, and there was steel in it now. The kind of steel that only comes from a woman who has already survived the worst thing life could throw at her. You gave me my daughter back. I already booked the flight. I'm testifying, Bear. I'm not going to let you disappear from her life because some judge doesn't understand what you did for us. Bear closed his eyes, and for the first time in 3 days, something in his chest loosened. Just a little. The courthouse smelled like floor polish and old paper. Bear sat in a hard wooden chair, his big hands folded on the table in front of him like he didn't know what else to do with them. He'd worn his one good shirt, the blue one without holes, and he'd combed his beard flat that morning, trying to look like the kind of man a judge would trust. His lawyer, a thin woman named Patricia with sharp glasses and a sharper voice, kept telling him to sit up straight. Just breathe, Marcus, she whispered. Let the facts speak. Bear nodded, but his stomach was in knots. He'd faced down angry men twice his size without blinking. But this was worse. This was Della's whole future sitting on a scale, and he had no control over which way it tipped. The judge, a stern-faced woman named Judge Holloway, with silver hair pulled back tight, flipped through papers on her desk. The court has reviewed the jurisdictional issues surrounding Mr. Donovan's guardianship petition, she said. There are significant concerns about procedure. Guardianship was filed and granted outside the county where the child was found, and there are questions about oversight. Bear's jaw tightened. He kept his eyes forward. However, the judge continued, the court will hear testimony before making any final determination. Patricia stood. The defense calls Anne Whitfield to the stand. Anne walked up slowly, her heels clicking against the tile floor. She wore a simple gray dress, her hair pulled back, and her hands trembled slightly as she raised her right hand to be sworn in. But when she sat down and looked at the judge, her voice came out steady and clear. Your Honor, I want to tell you what this man did for my daughter. Anne began. 2 years ago, I ran from a man who hurt me every single day. I thought I was protecting Della by leaving her behind for a short time, just until I could come back for her safely. I was wrong. I trusted the wrong people. And because of that, my daughter spent 2 years living in fear, and one terrible night, she was locked inside a piece of furniture and left to die. Her voice cracked, but she pushed forward. Marcus Donovan heard her scream when no one else did. He didn't walk away. He didn't call it someone else's problem. He broke that armoire open with his bare hands, and he held my little girl until she stopped shaking. And when the system wanted to hand her over to strangers, he stood up and said no. He gave her a home. He gave her safety. He gave her the first real kindness she'd had in years. She looked directly at Bear now, her eyes wet. My daughter is alive today, sitting outside that door, laughing again, because of him. Whatever paperwork mistakes were made, They were made by a man who was too busy loving my child to worry about which county line he was standing on. Please don't punish him for that." The courtroom was silent. Even Judge Holloway, who had seen thousands of cases, sat still for a long moment. Then the doors at the back of the courtroom burst open. Boots, dozens of them. Heavy, steady, deliberate, the Hells Angels chapter walked in, one after another, filling the back rows and then the side aisles. Leather jackets, patches, beards, tattoos crawling up necks and forearms. The bailiff straightened, unsure whether to intervene. But they didn't shout, didn't cause a scene. They simply stood, shoulder to shoulder, a wall of quiet strength. An older biker named Tank stepped forward, holding a folder. "Your Honor, if it pleases the court, we've got documentation. Toy drives for the Children's Hospital, coat donations every winter, 60 escorts of women and kids to domestic violence shelters over the last 5 years, done quiet, no publicity." Bears led half of them himself. Judge Holloway's eyebrows rose slightly as she took the folder from the bailiff. She flipped through it, her expression unreadable, but her eyes lingered on certain pages longer than others. The room stayed silent, waiting. Finally, she closed the folder and looked up. First at Anne, then at the wall of leather and steel standing at the back of her courtroom, and finally at Bear himself. "This court will take a recess," she said, "to consider all testimony and evidence presented today." She struck her gavel once, and the room let out a breath it hadn't known it was holding. The bailiff's voice cut through the courtroom like a bell. "All rise." Bear stood up so fast his chair scraped the floor. His lawyer, a small woman named Miss Petrocelli, who had barely slept in 3 days preparing this case, put a steadying hand on his arm. He barely felt it. His heart was pounding so hard he thought everyone in the room could hear it. Judge Harmon walked back in, her black robe swishing around her ankles. She did not look happy or sad. She looked like a woman who had been thinking hard for a long time and had finally landed somewhere. She sat down, folded her hands on the bench, and let the silence stretch out. Bear glanced back once. Della sat in the front row between Anne and Marissa, her small hands twisted together in her lap. She caught his eye and gave him the tiniest smile. It was enough to keep him standing. Behind Della, the courtroom was packed wall to wall with leather. Rows of Hells Angels sat shoulder to shoulder, arms crossed, faces set like stone, but their eyes were soft. Big men who fixed engines and broke up bar fights sat quiet as church mice, waiting. "Mr. Donovan," Judge Harmon said finally, "please remain standing." Bear straightened his shoulders. "I want to say, for the record, that this case has been one of the more unusual matters to come before this court." She paused, looking down at her notes, then back up at him. "When I first reviewed the guardianship filing, I had serious concerns. A man with no legal parenting experience, no biological or marital connection to the child, and a criminal record among his known associates that, frankly, raised red flags." Bear felt his stomach drop. He had expected this. He had told himself he was ready for it. He wasn't. "But," the judge continued, and something in her voice shifted, "I have spent the last hour reading through testimony, character statements, and records that tell a very different story than the one on paper." She lifted a stack of papers. "I have letters from a police officer commending Mr. Donovan's cooperation and instincts during a child endangerment investigation. I have testimony from Miss Whitfield describing in detail how her daughter was found, cared for and protected during the most terrifying period of her young life. And I have watched, this morning, as an entire community showed up in this courtroom, not to intimidate, but to stand behind a man they clearly believe in. She looked past Bear to the rows of bikers. A few of them shifted, uncomfortable being noticed, but none of them looked away. "It is easy," the judge said, "to judge a book by its cover. I will admit, I nearly did the same, but the law is not about covers. It is about the well-being of a child, and by every measure presented to this court, Della has been safe, cared for, and loved since the day Mr. Donovan found her." Bear's throat tightened. He didn't dare speak. Therefore, Judge Harmon said, straightening the papers in front of her, "This court grants Marcus Donovan permanent legal recognition as Della's godfather and guardian figure, with full rights of ongoing presence, visitation, and involvement in her life, in coordination with her mother, Anne Whitfield, as primary custodial parent." For a moment, nobody moved. It was as if the whole room needed to hear the words twice before they believed them. Then, Della was out of her seat. She moved so fast, Anne barely had time to react, small sneakers slapping against the courtroom floor, weaving past Miss Petroselli's briefcase, past the railing, straight toward Bear. He turned just in time to catch her as she threw her arms around his waist and buried her face against his leather vest. "You're not going anywhere," she said, her voice muffled but fierce. "No, kiddo," Bear said, his voice rough. He wrapped his arms around her, one hand cradling the back of her head like he had 100 times before. "I'm not going anywhere." Behind them, the courtroom erupted, not loud, not disorderly, but full. Bikers who had spent decades being told they were dangerous, unworthy, not to be trusted, sat with tears running openly down their weathered faces. Someone let out a low, choked laugh. Another clapped a hand on his neighbor's shoulder. Anne stood at the railing, both hands pressed to her mouth, watching her daughter hold on to the man who had saved her life. The sun hung warm and gold over the little coastal town, the kind of afternoon that smelled like salt water and cut grass. Bear rode slow down the winding street, his engine rumbling low and steady, the sound as familiar to Della now as her own heartbeat. He didn't even get the kickstand down before he heard her. "Bear." Della came flying off the porch steps, her sneakers slapping against the walkway, brown hair streaming behind her like a flag. She hit him full force, wrapping her arms around his middle before he'd even swung his leg over the bike. He staggered back a step, laughing, one big hand landing gentle on the back of her head. "Whoa there, kiddo. Give a guy a second to park. You're late," she said, though she was grinning too wide for it to be a real complaint. "Traffic," Bear said. "There's a seagull convention happening on Main Street. Real bad scene." Della giggled, the sound easy and bright, nothing like the frightened whisper he'd first heard coming from inside that armoire almost a year ago. It still caught him sometimes, how far she'd come. How far they both had. He pulled his helmet off and set it on the seat, and together they walked up toward the house. It was a small place, blue with white trim, flower boxes under the windows that Anne had planted herself. Nothing fancy. But it was warm. It was theirs. Anne stood in the doorway, wiping her hands on a dish towel, her hair pulled back, sleeves rolled up. She smiled when she saw him, the kind of smile that came easy now, not the careful, guarded look she used to wear like armor. "You're just in time," she said. "I made too much again." "You always make too much," Bear said, climbing the porch steps. That's because you always eat like you haven't seen food in a week. Man's gotta keep his strength up." Della laughed and tugged his hand, pulling him through the front door like she did every single Sunday, like this was the most normal thing in the world. Maybe it was. Now, maybe that was the whole point. The kitchen was small but bright, sunlight pouring in through the window over the sink, catching the dust in the air like little floating specks of gold. The table was already set, 3 plates, 3 glasses, a pot of something simmering on the stove that smelled like garlic and tomatoes and home. "Sit. Sit," Anne said, waving a spoon at him. "Della, get the bread." Della scrambled up onto a stool to reach the bread box, still talking a mile a minute about the science project she'd started at school. Something about volcanoes and baking soda, and how her teacher said she had real potential, which she repeated proudly, like the words tasted good in her mouth. Bear settled into his usual chair, the one that had become his without anybody ever saying so out loud. He looked around the kitchen. The refrigerator was covered in Della's drawings, crayon suns and stick figure families, one of them clearly him, drawn twice as wide as everybody else, with a little leather vest scribbled in black marker. There was a photograph stuck under a magnet, the 3 of them at the beach last month. Della in the middle, squinting into the sun, Bear's arms slung over her shoulders. Anne set the pot down in the middle of the table and took her seat, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Okay," she said. "Dig in before Della talks our ears off." "Hey." Della protested, but she was laughing. They ate together, the 3 of them, plates clinking, forks scraping. Della recounting the volcano story again with even more excitement the second time through. Anne teased her gently. Bear listened, quiet, the way he always did, letting the sound of their voices wash over him like something he never knew he'd been thirsty for. He thought about the man he used to be. Big and rough and alone, hauling furniture behind an abandoned warehouse, never expecting anything more from life than the open road and his brothers at his back. He'd never wanted kids. Never thought himself the type. Never thought he deserved a table like this one, a family like this one. But here he was. Della kicked her feet under the table, still talking, her plate half forgotten, sunlight catching gold in her hair. Anne caught his eye across the table and smiled, small and warm and knowing. Bear picked up his fork, and for the first time in a long time, he felt full in a way that had nothing to do with food. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.